The Imperium has a word for the Adeptus Custodes, and the word is bodyguard. 10,000 golden warriors, each one supposedly a match for a full squad of space marines, built, the Imperium says, for one purpose: to stand between the Emperor of mankind and anything that would harm him. It's a clean explanation. It is held for 10,000 years, and it's the most successful piece of misdirection in the history of the Imperial Truth. The problem with Bodyguard begins with how you build one, and specifically with how the Emperor built everything else. The Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, were built as an army, and built the way you build an army, through a process designed for scalable production from the start. Each Space Marine receives 19 separate gene seed organs implanted sequentially across years of conditioning, each organ derived from a primarch's genetic template. Two of those organs, the progenoid glands, one positioned in the neck, one in the chest, exist for a specific reason that has nothing to do with making the individual marine stronger. The neck gland matures over 5 years, the chest gland over 10. Both are harvested at death or through surgical extraction, cultured in the chapter's gene banks, and used to grow new organs for the next generation of recruits. Each Space Marine is, among other things, a seed bank. He carries the means of his own replacement inside his body. The system was designed to absorb attrition at galactic scale. During the height of the Horus heresy, accelerated cultivation methods existed to speed that maturation cycle, because the legions needed to replace losses faster than the standard process allowed. Each numbered legion was effectively a self-renewing production line anchored to a single genetic source, capable of growing, rebuilding, and expanding across decades. Losses were replaceable.
Units that took catastrophic casualties could reconstitute. The Legion as a formation could survive the death of any individual within it. The Emperor described his Astartes in explicit terms. They were his finest warriors, to be shaped like clay in the furnace of war. Clay to be molded. The image is deliberate. Clay is the material you shape and reshape. You build with it until the piece breaks, and then you make another. That is what building an army looks like. Scalable, replicable, designed to sustain operation across the loss of individual components. The Legion is the unit. The Marine is the element. What the Emperor built alongside this army, building it earlier, actually, before the legions existed, before the Thunder Warriors were superseded, operated by entirely different logic. The Custodes have no gene seed, no primarch template, and no replication mechanism built into each warrior's body.
Candidates are selected not as adolescents who have already proven something under pressure, as Astartes aspirants must, but as infants, before any capacity to demonstrate fitness under real conditions can exist. The process that follows modifies the candidate at a cellular level, simultaneously remaking tissue, bone, organ, and psyche. Crucially, the process is only partly standardized. Certain traits, unusual but valuable, can be created or amplified depending on what a specific candidate's biology and psychology reveal. The procedure adapts to the individual, rather than forcing the individual into a fixed template. Two custodians raised through the same sequence of steps don't emerge identical. The selection filter is brutal. One in many thousands of candidates proves suitable even for the first step. At every subsequent stage, the standard is absolute. The psyches of custodians are crafted and shaped as a master gemsmith might cut and polish a perfect stone, fashioned to precise order and pattern. If at any stage the flaw appears, the subject is discarded rather than adjusted. What survives isn't merely a superior warrior, it's a singular one. Each suit of armor is individually forged and fitted, the owner's name inscribed inside the helmet, Gems from Terra itself cut and set by skilled artisans into the plating, changed whenever the custodian transitions between roles. These aren't the logistics of a guard corps. A guard corps uses standardized equipment because interchangeability is the point. The Custodes are, by construction, the opposite of interchangeable. Constantine Valdor, the first Captain General, titled the First of the 10,000, accumulated names across his career through specific deeds, each inscribed into the interior of his armor.
That isn't a record of rank progression. That is a biography carried on the body by a warrior built to remember everything, across a lifespan measured in millennia. The Emperor described his custodians in language that sounds nothing like the language of army building. He told them directly, each one of the 10,000 represents genetic lore acquired over many lifetimes. Each one of you is unique, a work of art never to be repeated. I am miserly with your lives, where I would spend so many others. Hold that sentence next to the Astartes description. Clay shaped in a furnace of war on one side, works of art never to be repeated on the other. An emperor who would spend others freely, who explicitly refused to treat these warriors the same way. The distinction isn't about combat capability. The distinction is about replaceability. Space Marines are meant to be replaced. The Emperor explicitly refused to replace his custodians.
The argument built from these facts, and it's an argument, an interpretive case, not a verdict any text directly pronounces, runs as follows. A single heir can be killed. A single heir can be turned, corrupted, scattered. The Horus heresy demonstrated exactly how catastrophically concentrated succession fails. 9 primarchs fell, each one individually more powerful than any custodian by most measures, each a single point of failure that chaos could isolate and corrupt. But 10,000 individually processed, non-replicable warriors, each carrying a unique piece of genetic and psychological engineering conducted at a level no institution in the Imperium can match or reproduce. That can't be destroyed in a single stroke. You can't capture it all. You can't turn it by turning one person. As long as the order survives, what the Emperor was continues to exist, distributed across the body of the 10,000, rather than concentrated in any one vessel. Call this the distributed heir.
That term appears nowhere in any official record. It's this argument's own analytical frame, not a canonical designation. But it accounts for something the perfectionism explanation does not. Why the Emperor would make these warriors explicitly irreplicable when replication is what makes a guard corps sustainable. A perfectionist builds the best possible version of a replaceable thing. Someone building a distributed continuation builds something they can't afford to lose, because losing it means losing what they were. One institutional provision does not fit the bodyguard frame at all, and it was built into the order's structure from the founding. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes holds, by constitutional position, the authority of the Emperor himself when the Emperor can't act. That provision does not describe a bodyguard's role. A bodyguard's authority ends when the principal falls. The authority granted to the Captain General activates precisely when the Emperor is no longer able to direct events. That is a succession provision, written into the Custodes' institutional architecture before the First Legion ever marched. In 004 M31, Magnus the Red's psychic warning, launched across interstellar space in desperation, in direct violation of the Edict of Nicaea, because Magnus believed the Emperor needed to know about Horus immediately, tore through the wards protecting the Imperial Palace. The Golden Throne malfunctioned. The webway portal beneath the palace cracked open. Daemon hordes poured through into the tunnels beneath Terra. The Emperor seated himself on the throne and began the immense
psychic effort of stabilizing the breach. And he sent his custodians in, not to guard his body. His body was on the throne, with a fraction of the 10,000 remaining in the palace above.
He sent the full weight of his irreplaceable warriors, the weapons he had said he wouldn't spend freely, the works of art never to be repeated, into the webway itself, into a sub-realm of broken angles and recursive geometry where the enemy couldn't be permanently killed and allies couldn't be replaced. The Sisters of Silence went with them. Mechanicum forces and Titan engines followed. It wasn't enough. For 10 years, from 004 M31 through 014 M31, concurrent with the entire public catastrophe of the Horus heresy above, the Custodes held a series of blockades across the tunnels, launching counterattacks to keep demon masses off balance while the Mechanicum sealed rifts behind them. The fighting retreated slowly toward an abandoned Eldar city the survivors would call Kalistar, the impossible city, its towers still standing, its plazas repurposed as killing grounds where golden warriors bled against things that didn't bleed in return. 3 tribunes commanded the force at the start: Kadai Valakan, Jassak, and Ra Endymion. Kadai died. Jassak died. Ra Endymion held command alone through the final phase, in a city whose walls the enemy eventually shattered. Greater demons came through the breaches: bloodthirsters, corrupted chaos space marines. A weapon entity called Drachnian appeared among the demonic hordes, something the records describe as having arrived specifically as the Emperor's own end. Around 5 years into the war, the 10,000 had been reduced to approximately 1,000. 9,000 custodians lost in that span. 9,000 works of art never to be repeated. 9,000 unique expressions of genetic lore accumulated over many lifetimes, consumed in 5 years of fighting in a place no human being was built to survive. The Emperor had said he was miserly with their lives. 9,000 dead in 5 years tells you something about how he understood miserly when the stakes were high enough. What he was protecting in that webway wasn't his physical body. His body was on the throne, stabilizing the breach, technically persisting. What he was protecting was the webway project itself, the possibility of a future in which humanity could travel without the warp, communicate without astropaths, navigate without navigators, approach its own psychic potential without burning in the light of it. A future in which the species might safely ascend. That isn't bodyguard work. That is executor work, carrying the principal's vision forward at cost, because the vision can't be abandoned. When the final collapse came, the Emperor freed himself from the throne for a single day by sacrificing 1,000 psychers to maintain the mechanism in his absence. He entered the webway and blazed through the demonic hordes, golden fire moving through geometry that should have been impossible to traverse. He gave the survivors time to evacuate entirely. Then he returned to the throne and sealed the gate behind him. Ra Endymion didn't make that evacuation. The Emperor had charged Drachnian into Ra's body, sealed the demon weapon within his most senior surviving custodian, and given him a final direct command. 3 words preserved in the records: climb, custodian. Ra ran into the depths of the webway, carrying something that couldn't be allowed near Terra, on a course the Emperor had set for him, away from everything. The last recorded direct instruction the Emperor gave to one of his 10,000 wasn't, "Guard me." It was, "Carry this away. Go as far as you can. Don't stop." The Custodes who emerged from the webway after that decade were 1/10 of what they had been. They would rebuild. The process survived.
The servants within the palace knew the methodology, but the rebuilt order that would stand the 10,000-year vigil wasn't the original 10,000. Those were gone.
What survived and was reconstructed was the process itself, the design philosophy, the thing that had made them what they were, continuing to produce new iterations of itself, even without the Emperor's direct hand. Which is precisely what a distributed continuation mechanism does when the principal can no longer act. After the siege of Terra and the Emperor's permanent interment on the throne, the Custodes changed their cloaks from red to black, the color of mourning. They withdrew from galactic-scale operations. For the next 10,000 years, they deployed beyond Terra only rarely and in limited numbers. Shield Captain Tibulus Maxon articulated the vigil in the Order's own preserved words. Ours is the duty absolute. Ours is the vigil that must never end. Ours is the timeless honor, the willing sacrifice, the penitence enduring. We stand a watch that will never be relieved, and we stand it gladly, out of adoration for He who gave us life. This isn't performance.
Custodian Tiberius Conster described 100 years of motionless watch in the Sanctum Imperialis, standing still in the half-light of the throne room, attuned to threats that never came, measuring time not in events but in readiness, and called patience itself a weapon. The grief was real. The penitence was real. The Custodes genuinely understood their failure to protect the Emperor as a wound the Order might never stop carrying. But the devotion reading alone does not account for what the dormancy actually looked like in institutional terms. Blood games continued uninterrupted throughout the withdrawal. The practice, in which a detachment of custodians played the role of enemy infiltrators attempting to breach the Imperial Palace's own defenses, never stopped during the 10 millennia of the vigil. The original inspiration came from a Great Crusade incident in which Alpharius, primarch of the Alpha Legion, personally infiltrated the palace and reached a theoretical firing solution on the Emperor's transport before revealing the vulnerability to Valdor. Valdor formalized the games from that point forward, a permanent adversarial rehearsal, with a portion of the Custodes always on detached duty trying to find the gaps, updating their own security in response to threats they themselves simulated. Between the heresy and the Indomitus Crusade, a specialized corps was charged with recovering actual threats, including captured Chaos Space Marines, from across the Imperium and releasing them inside the palace as blood game participants, because real conditions require real testing. For 10,000 years, some portion of the 10,000 was continuously rehearsing for a scenario it had not yet faced. That isn't an institution at rest.
That is an institution maintaining operational readiness through the vigil. Off-world, the dormancy had documented exceptions. In the 36th millennium, during the Age of Apostasy, a small number of custodians moved against the tyrant Goge Vandire, working through secret passages in the palace, ultimately bringing Alicia Dominica, leader of the Brides of the Emperor, before the Emperor's presence. What passed between her and the Emperor isn't preserved in any record, but when she emerged, Vandire's reign was over within hours. The custodians involved didn't receive orders from the High Lords. They exercised their own judgment about what the Emperor required, acted on it, and returned to the vigil. The dormancy was also, eventually, codified not as custom, but as law. The Edict of Restraint formally confined the Custodes' primary operational posture to Terra. The Lex Imperialis gave that confinement legal weight. Grief does not require legislation. Custom does not require an edict. Someone had to make the dormancy binding, which means that without making it binding, it might have given way. Legal structures exist to hold things in place that would otherwise move. When the Great Rift arrived, one faction within the High Lords specifically hoped that Trajan Valorous, the 17th Captain General, holder of the Emperor's successor authority, would vote to dissolve the Lex Imperialis. That vote was expected to matter. Everyone involved understood that this decision was the Captain General's to make, not a decision of the wider Imperium to impose on him. The succession reading of the 10,000-year vigil, the plan was on standby. The Emperor persisted on the throne, attenuated, his consciousness increasingly uncertain, unable to direct events in any ordinary sense, but persisting. As long as he persisted, the succession had not formally arrived. The heir does not activate while the principle still holds, however tenuously. The Custodes maintained position, preserved the design, kept the process running, and when specific threats to what the Emperor was required action without authorization, Vandire being the clearest case, they acted, and then returned to the holding pattern. The primarchs were never comfortable for the Custodes. The Order had reservations about the Primarch project from the beginning. Beings raised by human cultures rather than shaped within the Emperor's direct oversight, powerful enough to potentially challenge the Imperium's foundational structures, were always a category of institutional concern. 8 of 20 vindicated that concern. The heresy wasn't an argument the Custodes needed to make twice. The constitutional position is explicit. The Custodes answer to the Emperor and their own leaders. No Primarch falls within that chain of command.
During the Great Crusade, the Custodes traveled as the Emperor's personal envoys, operating parallel to the Primarchs, answerable only to their Captain General and through him to the Emperor directly. The Primarchs commanded legions. The Custodes occupied a different institutional space entirely. In the current era, the Custodes' relationship with Guilliman takes a specific form. The Imperial Regent can coordinate with the Custodes because Trajan Valorous allows it, not because any formal hierarchy positions Guilliman above the Captain General. Tribune Maldovar Colquan, one of the more documented contemporary custodians, regards Guilliman's political leadership with persistent institutional skepticism. His working assumption, preserved in the records, is that the returned Primarch thinks himself to be acting in humanity's best interests only because he was made to think that way.
Shield Captain Valerian defied an inquisitor in the contemporary era who attempted to assert authority in his presence. The Inquisition has no power over the Custodes. Even Space Marine commanders of any rank are required to kneel in the Imperial Palace. The Order does not consider itself a component of the Imperium's institutional hierarchy. It considers itself what the hierarchy exists to serve. Valerian himself provided the most revealing self-description available from any custodian of the modern era. He said, "We were never soldiers. To them, it must seem as if we are wrath incarnate. To them, it must seem as if we were created for destruction and nothing else. But we were his companions once. We were the ones in whom he confided. We were his counselors. We were his artisans. We were the first glimpse at what the species could become if shepherded aright and unshackled from its vicious weaknesses. Counselors, artisans, the first glimpse of what humanity could become." A shield captain of the Emperor's personal bodyguard describes the Order as something that was never built to fight. The fighting always in service of something larger. The shepherding of the species toward what it could become if the process weren't interrupted. One of the documented duties of contemporary custodians is interpreting the Emperor's will, determining what the Emperor would want in a specific situation, and acting on that determination. That is what an executor does. It isn't what a guard does. The succession reading of the Primarch coldness is structural.
A mechanism that exists to continue the Emperor's will does not regard warmly the figure who has arrived to continue the Emperor's will by other means. Guilliman returned as the closest thing the Imperium has to a legitimate claimant on the Emperor's authority. The Custodes, in the succession thesis's terms, are the other claimant, older, built for it, waiting for the conditions to activate.
Their institutional distance isn't personal rivalry. It's the posture of something that does not recognize a competing answer to the question its existence answers. That reading is available. Straightforward custodian arrogance, accumulated over 10,000 years of watching the Imperium function without supervision, is also sufficient explanation. Legitimate distrust of Astartes-grade beings, given the historical record, is also sufficient. The succession framing is the more structurally elegant reading. It isn't the only one, and an honest account must say so. The Great Rift tore the galaxy in 999 M41. Cadia fell. Daemon forces reached Terra itself. The Battle of Lion's Gate brought chaos to the doorstep of the Imperial Palace for the first time since the siege. And in the wreckage of that crisis, with Guilliman resurrected and fighting his way through the Terran Crusade, something shifted that had not shifted in 10,000 years.
Behind locked doors, behind complex ward systems and layers of psychic protection, Captain General Trajan Valoris met with Robute Guilliman. The 17th Captain General and the Imperial Regent ratified a formal amendment to the Custodes' operational role. The Edict of Restraint was modified. The Lex Imperialis was dissolved. The formal characterization matters. The amendment was described in the official record as a logical extension of the vows of duty they had sworn. Those exact words. Not a new directive, not a crisis exception. An extension of pre-existing vows. The same mandate, applied at wider scope because the threats that mandate covers have spread beyond the palace walls. Valoris stated it himself. The duty of the Emperor's defense does not end at the walls of the Imperial Palace. Our war is like an endless game of regicide, played over countless boards against infinite foes at once. In such a contest, one must be constantly preemptive, always cunning, and ever ready to seize any advantage that presents itself. He isn't describing a new duty. He is describing the original duty's geographic scope finally matching the actual scope of the threat. The emissaries imperatus are the most precise canonical evidence for what actually drove the expansion. When Guilliman announced the Indomitus Crusade, the Custodes as an institution had reservations. Specifically about the Primarchs Space Marine project Guilliman intended to distribute across the chapters. Strengthening Astartes' forces that might eventually turn again was exactly the institutional concern the Order had carried since the heresy. And yet a large number of emissaries imperatus step forward to join the crusade anyway. These are the custodians who believe they can hear the Emperor's voice during meditation, who act as his personal messengers across the galaxy. Their stated reason: they were compelled, they said, by the spirit of the Emperor to accompany the crusade, their own interpretation of the Emperor's will, not Guilliman's orders, not the amendment Valoris had ratified. The emissaries moved because they read what the Emperor wanted and acted on that reading, overriding the institution's own caution. Their presence was so significant that chapters the crusade never physically visited, who received the Primaris technology through designated torchbearer fleets, accepted the gift because custodians were delivering it. One does not decline something that arrives in the Emperor's own hand. After 10,000 years of the Black Cloak, the Custodian Guard cast off their black cloaks and taken to the Sea of Stars once more. The canonical language is specific, not for the first time, once more, as something that was done before, was stopped, and has now resumed. Valorous himself, a wise man draws his swords when the time is right to wield them. A fool dies with blades still sheathed, fearing that there might yet come a time of greater need. This isn't the language of someone who has received orders and is carrying them out. This is the language of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and has now judged that the moment has arrived. The crisis response reading must be stated plainly and fairly. The amendment required Guilliman's co-ratification. The Great Rift is a genuine civilizational catastrophe. Protecting the Emperor's physical safety from a galaxy in collapse plausibly requires galaxy-wide threat neutralization.
The official record describes the Custodes as
forced to take a more active role by post-rift conditions. That reading is fully available from the evidence. The succession argument does not require it to be wrong. Both can be true. The legal form required a partner because the Lex Imperialis required formal dissolution. The internal motivation, emissaries acting on their own interpretation, Valorous framing the expansion as an extension of pre-existing vows, the canonical language describing the change as resumption rather than departure, points toward a mechanism that was already present, that had been waiting, and that recognized the conditions it was built to recognize. For 10,000 years, the Imperium gave you one word for the Golden Warriors, and the word was bodyguard, and the word wasn't a lie. It was something more useful than a lie. It was an incomplete truth, held incomplete on purpose, for exactly as long as the incompleteness needed to hold.
Because the full word was never guard.
Look again at the construction. The Space Marines were mass-produced, gene seed derived from primarch templates, progenoid glands maturing over 5 and 10 years, so each Marine could seed his own replacement, numbered legions built as self-renewing production lines, an army designed from the first day to sustain attrition. The Custodes were built by entirely different logic. No gene seed, no replication mechanism carried inside each warrior's body. A process that adapts to each individual candidate, that discards at the first flaw rather than adjusting, that produced warriors the Emperor himself described as unrepeatable. 10,000 suits of armor individually forged and inscribed with their owners' names. The bulk of 9,000 consumed within the first 5 years of fighting in the webway, not to protect the Emperor's body, but to carry his vision through a crisis he couldn't manage alone.
The cost only makes sense if what is being protected isn't the man, but what the man was. The 10,000 years in the shadow of the throne weren't devotion alone. They were a holding pattern, legally encoded as the Edict of Restraint, formally enforced by the Lex Imperialis, maintained through 10 millennia of blood games and rare off-world actions taken on the Custodes' own judgment. The vigil was genuine. Tibulus Maxon meant every word. But legal structures don't encode devotion. They encode constraints on an institution that would otherwise have moved. The scenario the Order was built for, a galaxy that still has the Emperor and no longer has the Emperor's ability to act, is the current canon. The Golden Warriors dissolved the legal constraint. The Black Cloaks came off. The emissaries Imperatus moved into the galaxy on their own interpretation of the Emperor's will. Valorous framed the expansion as a logical extension of what was always there. And they regard the returned Primarch, who has arrived to continue the Emperor's will by other means, with the documented institutional distance of something that does not recognize a competing answer to the question its existence answers. The Custodes didn't leave the throne room to defend the Imperium's future. They left the throne room because they are the Imperium's future, and the dormant phase is over, and the succession has begun walking. The Imperium called them bodyguards for 10,000 years. It's going to spend the era of ruin learning the rest of the word. Subscribe for more stories like this.